There's a particular kind of silence that settles over a kitchen table when there's not enough food to go around. Our great-grandparents knew that silence, felt it in their bones during those dark years of the Great Depression when jobs disappeared, savings evaporated, and putting dinner on the table became an act of creativity and desperation. Between 1929 and 1939, American families learned to make something from nothing, to stretch a nickel until it screamed, and to feed hungry children with whatever could be scraped together from bare pantries and barren gardens. The meals that emerged from those difficult years weren't fancy or particularly delicious, but they kept families alive when the world seemed to be falling apart around them. These weren't recipes passed down with pride, they were survival tactics, reminders of hard times that most people wanted to forget once prosperity returned. Grandmothers who lived through the Depression often took these recipes to their graves, too ashamed or too haunted to share the meals that marked the worst years of their lives. Today, we're looking at 15 forgotten Depression-era dinners that kept families alive. Meals that deserve to be remembered not because we want to eat them again, but because they tell the story of American resilience, creativity, and the unbreakable will to survive when everything else has been taken away. Water pie, when even sugar was a luxury. Water pie sounds like a joke, like something you'd make up to tease someone about poverty cooking, but it was absolutely real, and it filled bellies when there was nothing else. The recipe consisted of a basic pie crust filled with water, a bit of sugar if you had it, a splash of vanilla extract for flavor, and a few pats of butter floating on top. You'd bake it in the oven, and somehow, through kitchen magic and the chemistry of desperate times, it would form a custardy filling that resembled actual pie. This wasn't delicious, let's be honest about that, but it was sweet, it was warm, and it gave children something that felt like a treat when treats had become distant memories. Families made pie because flour and sugar were cheaper than eggs, milk, or fruit, and because sometimes you needed to serve dessert to maintain the illusion that life was still normal. The act of making pie, even water pie, was an act of defiance against poverty, a statement that your family still deserved something special even when the world had taken everything else. Water pie disappeared the moment families could afford real ingredients again, vanishing without nostalgia or fanfare, a reminder of hardship that nobody wanted to preserve. Number 14, dandelion salad. The yard became the grocery store. When you couldn't afford lettuce from the store, you looked out your window and realized that your yard was full of edible greens that grew whether you wanted them to or not. Dandelions, those yellow-flowered weeds that gardeners spend fortunes trying to eliminate today, became a valuable food source during the Depression. Families would pick young dandelion leaves before they got too bitter, wash them thoroughly, and serve them as salad greens, often with nothing more than a bit of vinegar and salt for dressing. The taste was strong and slightly bitter, definitely an acquired preference, but dandelion greens were free, nutritious, and available from early spring through fall. Children were often sent into yards and fields with baskets, told to gather enough greens for dinner, turning foraging into a daily chore. Some families learned to blanch the greens to reduce bitterness, while others wilted them with hot bacon grease when bacon was available, creating a warm salad that felt more substantial. Dandelion salad disappeared from American tables as soon as grocery stores became accessible again, as soon as families could afford real lettuce and store-bought vegetables. Today, dandelion greens have made a hipster comeback in farmers markets, sold as artisanal and foraged, but Depression-era families would be baffled at the idea of paying money for weeds they once ate out of desperation. Number 13, prune pudding, government surplus turned into dinner. The federal government distributed surplus foods to struggling families during the Depression, and prunes were one of the most commonly available items, probably because nobody particularly wanted them even in good times. Prune pudding became a Depression staple not because anyone loved prunes, but because they were free or nearly free, shelf-stable, and could be turned into something resembling dessert with just a bit of sugar and cornstarch. You'd stew the prunes until they were soft, mash them into a pulp, thicken the mixture with whatever starch you had available, and serve it warm or cold depending on the season. The result was dark, sweet, and had a texture that children found either comforting or absolutely revolting. There was no middle ground. Prunes provided necessary nutrients and fiber when fresh fruits were impossibly expensive, and mothers convinced themselves that their children were getting vitamins even if the kids had to be bribed or threatened to actually eat the stuff. Some families tried to make prune pudding more appealing by adding spices like cinnamon or nutmeg, while others just served it plain and expected everyone to be grateful there was any dessert at all. Prune pudding vanished from American kitchens the moment other options became available, joining the long list of Depression foods that people were relieved to forget. Number 12. Potato soup without the cream, water, and hope. Potato soup today means creamy, rich comfort food loaded with cheese, bacon, and sour cream. During the Depression, potato soup meant boiling potatoes in water with maybe an onion if you had one, adding salt and pepper if available, and serving it hot to fill stomachs that ached with hunger. This wasn't the restaurant version. This was survival food, thin and bland, but filling enough to stop the worst of the hunger pangs. Potatoes were one of the few foods that remained relatively affordable during the Depression because they were easy to grow, stored well through winter, and provided enough calories to keep people functioning. Families who had even small yards planted potatoes, and those who didn't would buy them by the sack when they could scrape together enough money. The soup stretched one potato into multiple servings by adding water, making a single vegetable feed an entire family. Some versions included scraps of other vegetables saved from previous meals, creating a thin broth that tasted of whatever had been available that week. Children would be given the thicker portions from the bottom of the pot, while parents ate the thinner, waterier soup from the top, a silent sacrifice that happened at Depression-era tables every single night. Potato soup returned to being a treat rather than a necessity once the economy recovered, and modern versions bear almost no resemblance to the thin, desperate soup that kept families alive in the 30s. Number 11. Hoover stew, named after the president who couldn't fix it. Hoover stew carried the name of President Herbert Hoover, whose administration presided over the early years of the Depression, and the name wasn't meant as a compliment. This was bitter humor from people who felt abandoned by their government, naming their poverty meal after the man they blamed for not stopping the economic collapse. Hoover stew consisted of hot dogs cut into coins, canned tomatoes, and whatever vegetables you could find or afford, usually potatoes, onions, and maybe some macaroni to bulk it out. You'd throw everything into a pot with water, boil it until the ingredients were soft, and serve it hot with bread if you had any. The hot dogs were the cheapest meat available, often made from parts of animals you didn't want to think too hard about, but they added protein and a meaty flavor to an otherwise vegetarian dish. Canned tomatoes were a lifeline during the Depression because they were cheap, lasted forever, and added flavor and acid to otherwise bland meals. Hoover stew wasn't delicious, but it was filling, warm, and could feed a family of 6 for less than $1 when dollars were scarce and precious. The name disappeared once Roosevelt took office and conditions began to improve, as did the stew itself, replaced by meals that didn't remind people of the worst years of their lives. Today, Hoover stew has become an idiom meaning weak or ineffectual, and most people don't even know it was once an actual food that families ate out of necessity. Number 10. Milk toast, the invalid food that became an everyday meal. Milk toast was originally considered invalid food, something you'd serve to someone who was sick and couldn't handle solid food. But during the Depression, it became a regular dinner for families with almost nothing. The recipe was painfully simple. Toast a piece of bread, place it in a bowl, pour hot milk over it, add a bit of butter and salt if you had them, and eat it quickly before it turned to mush. This was Depression in food form, a meal that announced to everyone at the table that times were desperately hard. Children hated milk toast with a passion, understanding instinctively that this wasn't real dinner, that their parents were serving them baby food because there wasn't anything else. But milk toast was cheap. A slice of bread cost almost nothing, and milk was cheaper than meat or vegetables when you could get it at all. Some families tried to make it more appealing by adding cinnamon and sugar, turning it into a breakfast dish rather than dinner, but the basic humiliation of eating milk toast remained. Mothers who served milk toast often cried while preparing it, knowing that their children deserved better but unable to provide more. The meal disappeared immediately after the Depression ended, becoming a symbol of hard times that nobody wanted to remember or preserve. Today, milk toast has become an idiom meaning weak or ineffectual, and most people don't even know it was once an actual food that families ate out of necessity. Number 9. Poor man's meal. Potatoes and hot dogs, nothing else. The poor man's meal earned its name honestly. It was what you ate when you were poor, when the cupboards were bare, and when you needed to feed a family on almost nothing. Take a few potatoes, dice them up, and fry them in whatever cooking fat you had until they were crispy and brown. Slice up the cheapest hot dogs you could find and fry those too, mixing everything together in one pan to save on cleanup and cooking fuel. The result was greasy, heavy, and filling in a way that stopped hunger without providing much pleasure. This meal appeared on depression tables multiple times a week because potatoes and hot dogs were the two cheapest sources of calories available, and you could feed a family of 5 or 6 for less than 50 cents. There was no vegetable, no variety, no nutritional balance, just starch, fat, and whatever mystery meat went into Depression-era hot dogs. Children ate it without complaining because they understood, even if nobody said it out loud, that complaining about food when your parents were doing their best to keep you alive was not acceptable. Fathers would come home from another day of looking for work that didn't exist, sit down to a plate of fried potatoes and hot dogs, and eat in silence while trying not to feel like failures for not being able to provide better. The poor man's meal disappeared once families could afford variety again, but it left its mark on an entire generation who never forgot what it felt like to eat the same meal over and over while wondering if things would ever get better. Number 8. Corn mush, the breakfast that lasted all day. Corn mush, also called cornmeal mush or just plain mush, was a Depression breakfast staple that often became lunch and sometimes even dinner when there was nothing else. You'd boil water, slowly stir in cornmeal while it cooked, add a pinch of salt, and serve it hot in bowls like porridge. The texture was thick and grainy, the flavor was bland and slightly sweet from the corn, and children learned to eat it without comment because comment wasn't welcome. Cornmeal was cheap, lasted forever in the pantry, and provided enough calories to get through a day of school or searching for work. Some families poured a bit of milk over their mush, while others added molasses or honey when those luxuries were available. But mostly you just ate it plain and were expected to be grateful. The leftover mush would be poured into loaf pans, allowed to set firm, then sliced and fried the next day for another meal, transforming breakfast into a completely different texture and taste. Fried mush with a bit of butter or bacon grease was actually pretty good, a rare Depression dish that people might have enjoyed under different circumstances. But corn mush served hot from the pot day after day, week after week, became a symbol of poverty that nobody wanted to remember. It disappeared from American tables as soon as other breakfast options became available, and today you'd be hard-pressed to find anyone under 70 who's ever eaten cornmeal mush, let alone remembers what it tastes like. Number 7. Vinegar pie, the lemon pie that wasn't. Vinegar pie was Depression-era ingenuity at its finest and most desperate, a way to make something that tasted vaguely like lemon pie when lemons were impossibly expensive and eggs were luxury. The filling consisted of water, sugar, flour for thickening, butter if available, and vinegar to provide the sour tang that made it resemble lemon. You'd bake it in a basic pie crust and serve it as dessert, hoping the children wouldn't ask too many questions about why this lemon pie tasted so strange. The vinegar taste was strong and sharp, never quite achieving the bright, fresh flavor of actual lemons, but it was sweet, and it was pie, which meant it was special in a time when special was hard to come by. Families made vinegar pie because vinegar cost almost nothing and lasted forever on the shelf, while lemons were seasonal, expensive, and often unavailable in rural areas. The act of making pie, any pie, was important during the Depression because it maintained the ritual of dessert, the idea that families still sat together and shared something sweet even when everything else was bitter. Some women became quite skilled at making vinegar pie, learning to balance the vinegar with enough sugar to mask the harsh taste, adding vanilla or spices to create layers of flavor that distracted from what was missing. But nobody truly loved vinegar pie. It was tolerated, appreciated, but never treasured. It disappeared from American kitchens the moment families could afford real lemons again, and today it exists only in historical cookbooks and the fading memories of those who ate it as children and never quite forgot that strange, sharp taste. Number 6. Mulligan stew, the hobo meal that came home. Mulligan stew originated in hobo camps along railroad lines where unemployed men traveling the country in search of work would pool whatever food they had into one communal pot. The concept traveled home as the Depression deepened, and families adopted the same survival strategy. Throw whatever scraps you have into a pot with water and make stew. There was no recipe, no standard ingredients, just whatever was available that day. Potato peelings, stale bread, bones from previous meals, wilted vegetables, maybe a bit of meat if you were lucky. The result was different every time, sometimes edible and filling, sometimes barely palatable but eaten anyway because there was nothing else. Mulligan stew represented the absolute bottom of Depression cooking, the meal you made when you truly had nothing, when you were using scraps that would normally be thrown away or fed to animals. The name came from to mulligan, meaning to improvise or make do, and that's exactly what families did. They improvised survival from ingredients that barely qualified as food. Children would look into the pot and try to identify what was floating in the thin, greasy broth, learning young that beggars couldn't be choosers and that waste was the worst sin imaginable. Fathers who'd once been proud providers ate mulligan stew and stared at their empty bowls, wondering how their lives had fallen so far that they were feeding their families hobo food. The stew disappeared from family tables once circumstances improved, and most people who'd eaten it during hard times never spoke of it again, too ashamed to admit they'd once been reduced to eating scraps. Number 5. Spaghetti with boiled carrots and white sauce, the Italian meal that wasn't. Depression-era families learned to stretch expensive ingredients by replacing them with cheaper alternatives, which is how spaghetti with carrots and white sauce became a thing. Real Italian-American spaghetti would have meat sauce, maybe meatballs, cheese, and tomatoes, but those ingredients cost money that Depression families didn't have. Instead, they'd boil pasta, boil carrots separately, make a simple white sauce from flour, water, and a bit of butter if available, then mix it all together and call it dinner. This wasn't Italian food. This was desperation wearing an Italian costume, using the shape of pasta to create the illusion of a proper meal. The white sauce was thin and bland. The carrots added color and bulk but didn't really complement the pasta, and the absence of tomatoes and meat meant it tasted like nothing in particular. Children who ate this learned to associate spaghetti with poverty and disappointment, a far cry from the hearty Italian-American dishes that would become popular in later decades. Families served this because pasta was cheap and filling, and carrots were often available from backyard gardens even when other vegetables weren't. The white sauce was an attempt at gravy, at adding moisture and richness to an otherwise dry meal, but it never quite succeeded in making the dish satisfying. This particular combination disappeared quickly once families could afford real tomato sauce and meat again, replaced by versions of Italian food that actually resembled what Italian immigrants had been making all along. Number 4. Fried bologna sandwiches, when even bologna was a treat. Today, bologna is considered the bottom tier of lunch meat, a processed mystery meat that nobody brags about eating. During the Depression, a fried bologna sandwich was actually a treat, a meal that meant things weren't quite at rock bottom yet. You'd slice the bologna thick, fry it in a hot pan until the edges curled up and the meat developed crispy edges, then slap it between two pieces of bread, with mustard if you had it, plain if you didn't. The frying transformed cheap lunch meat into something with texture and depth, with crispy edges and a hot, salty center that filled your belly and required chewing, unlike the thin soups and mushes that dominated Depression tables. Bologna was one of the cheapest meats available, made from scraps and fillers and parts of animals nobody wanted to think about too hard. But it was meat, and meat meant protein and substance. Children would get excited about fried bologna nights because it meant they'd get actual meat, something that tasted good and filled the meat craving that beans and potatoes could never quite satisfy. The curled edges of the fried bologna would hold little pools of grease that soaked into the bread, adding calories and flavor in a time when both were precious commodities. Families ate fried bologna sandwiches multiple times a week, stretching 1 or 2 packages of meat across several meals, making it last, making it work. The meal stuck around longer than most Depression foods, remaining popular in working-class communities through the 50s and 60s, but eventually faded as better options became available and bologna's reputation sank to where it remains today.
Number 3. Creamed chipped beef on toast. SOS comes home. Military veterans from World War I brought this meal home with them, and it became a Depression staple for families looking for cheap protein. Officially called creamed chipped beef on toast, soldiers knew it by another name, SOS, which stood for same old stuff in polite company and something considerably more vulgar in reality. The dish consisted of dried beef that had been preserved with massive amounts of salt, torn into strips, then cooked in a white sauce made from flour, water or milk if available, and whatever fat you could spare. You'd pour this salty, gray mixture over toast and eat it hot, feeling the salt bite your tongue and the starchy sauce coat your stomach. Dried beef was cheap because it lasted forever without refrigeration, and a small package could flavor multiple meals when stretched with sauce and served over bread. The taste was intensely salty and vaguely meaty, more suggestion of beef than actual beef flavor, but it provided protein when fresh meat was impossibly expensive. Children often hated it, finding the slimy texture and overwhelming salt off-putting, but they ate it anyway because complaining about food during the Depression was unacceptable. The meal's crude military nickname reflected the monotony of eating the same things over and over, the soul-crushing repetitiveness of Depression meals that never seemed to change. Creamed chipped beef on toast stuck around in military mess halls and some working-class homes into the post-war period, but eventually faded as fresh meat became affordable again and people could finally stop eating rehydrated, oversalted beef scraps. Number 2. Bean soup, the meal that never ended. Bean soup appeared on Depression tables with such regularity that children grew to hate the sight of it, the smell of it, the taste of it, and the knowledge that there would always be more bean soup tomorrow. You'd buy a bag of dried beans, navy beans, pinto beans, whatever was cheapest, soak them overnight, then boil them with water, onions if you had them, maybe a ham bone or piece of salt pork for flavoring. The result was a thick, filling soup that cost almost nothing and could feed a family for days. Beans provided protein when meat was unaffordable, and dried beans lasted forever in the pantry, making them the ultimate Depression food. Mothers would make enormous pots of bean soup, serving it for dinner, then again for lunch the next day, then again for dinner that night, on and on until the pot was finally empty and everyone secretly hoped they'd never see beans again. But they would see beans again, because by the time that pot was empty, it was time to make another one, an endless cycle of bean soup that defined a Depression-era eating. The soup was usually thin, stretched with water to make it last longer, and the beans would be soft enough to mash with a fork, creating a texture somewhere between soup and paste. Some families tried to vary it by adding different vegetables when available, or by mashing some of the beans to thicken it, or by serving it over rice or cornbread. But it was always fundamentally bean soup. The meal stuck around longer than most Depression foods because beans remained cheap and practical, but eventually families who could afford to eat other things did, leaving bean soup as a budget option rather than a daily necessity. Number 1. Depression cake, also called war cake or wacky cake, represents the absolute pinnacle of Depression-era ingenuity. A cake that contained no eggs, no milk, and no butter, yet somehow still rose and tasted like actual cake. The recipe used flour, sugar, cocoa powder for a chocolate version, water, vegetable oil, vinegar, and baking soda, mixing directly in the pan and baking immediately. The vinegar reacted with the baking soda to create lift. The oil provided necessary fat, and the result was a dark, moist cake that didn't taste like poverty even though it was born from it. Mothers made depression cake for birthdays, holidays, and special occasions when they desperately wanted to give their children something normal, something that felt like celebration in a time when there was nothing to celebrate. Children would blow out candles on depression cakes and make wishes for better times, for more food, for their fathers to find work, for life to return to what it had been before the world fell apart. The cake wasn't fancy, it had no frosting unless you could afford powdered sugar mixed with a bit of milk, no decorations, no layers, but it was cake, and cake meant somebody cared, somebody tried, somebody refused to let poverty steal every bit of joy from childhood. Depression cake tasted good, which was remarkable considering what wasn't in it, and that's why some families kept making it even after the Depression ended, a reminder that you didn't need expensive ingredients to create something worth sharing. But most families abandoned it as soon as they could afford eggs and butter again, too haunted by the memories of why they'd learned to bake without them in the first place. These 15 meals tell a story that's hard for modern Americans to imagine, a time when feeding your family required creativity, desperation, and the willingness to eat things that barely qualified as food. Our great-grandparents survived the Depression not because these meals were good, but because they were possible, because you could make them from almost nothing and they'd keep you alive one more day. Most of these recipes disappeared the moment circumstances improved, vanished without regret or nostalgia because nobody wanted to remember the taste of poverty once they'd finally escaped it. The women who cooked these meals often refused to share the recipes with their daughters, wanting to spare them the knowledge that food could be this desperate, this joyless, this far removed from nourishment and love. But these meals deserve to be remembered, not so we can romanticize poverty or pretend that hardship builds character, but so we understand what survival actually looked like when America faced its darkest economic crisis. If you found this journey through Depression-era kitchens meaningful, give us a thumbs up and let us know in the comments if your grandparents or great-grandparents ever talked about what they ate during the Depression. Hit that subscribe button so you don't miss our next exploration of the American past, the stories we've forgotten, and the resilience that carried us through. Until next time, remember that the meals on our tables today represent victories our ancestors fought for, one desperate dinner at a time.